Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining us for our 4th annual Live Intentionally speaker series. We are thrilled to be bringing you this content. Of course, today is called Living with Presence, Connection, and Intention After Trauma. And given all that we are facing as a community and in our world with the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the tornadoes that occurred here in Middle Tennessee recently, this content is more relevant and needed than ever. So thank you for joining us. We are also so grateful to our generous sponsors who have made this possible. My name is Amy Alexander. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Refuge Center for Counseling. We are celebrating 15 years of service in this community. Just as a snapshot of who we are a Christ-centered, nonprofit organization that provides sliding fee scale counseling services to make this work affordable and accessible to all. Last year alone, we provided over 27,000 counseling sessions for 3,700 children, individuals, and families. We're so blessed to be here and hope that this content will travel wide and far. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today, and we hope it blesses you.
Hi, I'm Mike, and I'm a drug addict. And I believe that great leaders live like drug addicts. And I think that leaders should run their organizations like drug addicts. And the reason that I'm here is the Refuge Center is doing some incredible work. We want to live intentionally, especially for those of us affected by trauma. And this couldn't be even more relevant today as we go through the COVID-19 crisis. But a lot of us, regardless of a pandemic or not, we have experience overcoming hardships and finding a way to lead ourselves through them to the other side. And so today I'm going to talk about 3 different things that all of us need. And the first one is the ability to lead yourself. We focus so much on leading others. But at a time like this and in every time that is crucial in our lives, being able to lead yourself is the key. And the second one is I'm going to show you the number one way that leaders across the country are wasting countless amounts of energy and a way to reclaim that. I'm going to show you how to thrive, not just in work and in life. And when you thrive and work in life and other people watch how you live, you help empower them to thrive as well. Now, I'm not the first person to talk about leading yourself and reclaiming energy and thriving, but I am going to show you how to do these things in a unique way that you haven't seen before. And so the first thing I want you to do, now, I know you're in your living room or somewhere else like that. I want you to stand up. And so imagine 300 people, 500 people, thousands of people across the world standing up right now. And when I ask you a question and when your answer is yes, I want you to take a seat. I'm going to ask you 4 questions. And the first one is, in the last 30 days, have you said yes to something that you could say no to? If you have, please take a seat. In the last 30 days, have you hit a weakness? If you have, take a seat. In the last 30 days, did you avoid a difficult conversation? There's a lot of difficult conversations that we're avoiding right now. If you avoided just one, take a seat. In the last 30 days, if you held back your unique perspective, go ahead and take a seat. Now, when I speak to groups of 20, 200, 2,000, by the time I'm done with those 4 questions, almost everybody in the room is seated. And here's why. We are all taught to hide parts of our true selves, or what I call wearing a mask. And the leaders in this world are the greatest perpetrators, because leaders are taught that they have to have all the answers. They have to be strong. They cannot show weakness. They can't show insecurity. They can't show doubt. And if they've overcome obstacles in their lives, they can't talk about those obstacles. They need to lead in front and be strong for the rest of us. Except I don't believe that. And what I've learned is that in life, if all of our leaders are wearing masks, we all have to wear masks too, to hide our true selves because we're scared we won't be successful if we show the weakest parts of ourselves. And what I'm going to teach you is that everything comes down to this decision. And it's a decision that we make on an hourly, if not daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. It's a difference between a masked life and a mask-free life. A life where we hide parts of our true selves out of fear, or a life where we show our true selves out of faith. Now, what does great leaders live like drug addicts have to do with teaching people how to live and lead mask-free, teaching people how to lead yourself, reclaim energy, and thrive? It's because my experience as a drug addict taught me that the worst thing about me actually became the best thing about me. And being a drug addict, I knew what it was like to live behind a mask in order to get high. And as a recovering addict, I know what it's like to thrive mask-free. And so to illustrate what it's like as a drug addict, I have to go back 18 years when my daily habit was to use alcohol and drugs to get high and stay high from the minute I woke up to the minute I passed out at night. I was kicked out of my house. I was kicked out of my job. My car was repossessed. I was kicked out of school. I was throwing up blood. My life was basically almost over. Even though I was 23 years old, I knew that I would die if I continued this lifestyle. I saw no hope. And when I think about that time in my life and I think about how much a drug addict lives behind a mask in order to get what they want, I think about one night in particular. It's 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night. I'm stumbling down the streets of Venice Beach, California, looking to get higher and looking to get drunker like I always am. And I find myself seated with a homeless man on my left and a prostitute on my right, in a triangle of lies and manipulation. You see, I wanted the homeless man's blunt so that I could get higher. And he wanted the prostitute and she wanted me to be her last customer for the evening. But none of us were being honest about what we wanted. And none of us were being honest about what we had to offer. We were all wearing a mask. I pretended I had money and I didn't. He pretended he had more drugs and he didn't. And she pretended that her flirtation wasn't an attempted business transaction, and it was. All of us wearing a mask, scared to show our true selves. Now, that wasn't my bottom. My bottom came a couple months later, when I finally realized that staying high was so much work and I was never high enough. And so I decided that I was going to take hit after hit after hit after hit so that I could hopefully OD, because I know that the second before I pass out, I'll be high enough. And so I did. I took those hits and I kept going with the goal to pass out. And I finally got to a place where I was high enough. And for 5 minutes, I'd gotten to the place that I've been looking for. And then when those 5 minutes were over, I wanted more. And I knew that I could not maintain this lifestyle. I couldn't even feed my addiction. And so I became open to asking for help. My parents had offered to send me to rehab. And so September 1st, 2002 was my first day clean when I woke up at the Betty Ford Center out in Rancho Mirage, California. And when I got there, they told me something that I've been scared someone was going to tell me my whole life, that the masks had to go. Now, they didn't just tell me, hey, the masks have to go. You need to live mask-free, because the thing is that a drug addict doesn't stop using drugs and wearing masks when you tell us what to stop doing. You have to tell us what to start instead. And so they taught me 3 principles that are the reason that I'm here today. Practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work. I'd heard these words before, but no one had ever taught me that these principles would save my life, or even how to practice them. And when I got out of rehab, I knew that 90% or more of the addicts that try to get clean will end up in jails, institutions, or death. So I committed my life to living these principles, and that was tested immediately. Because when I got out of rehab, I moved into a halfway house. And when I moved into this halfway house, they told me I had 5 business days to get a job or they would kick me out. And I went applying for jobs everywhere, and everywhere I had to leave the last 3 years blank in my work history because I'd been doing nothing but getting high and being in rehab. And so I didn't get any callbacks. And then on day 3, I finally got a callback from one place, a place called Sam Goody, which for a lot of you have no idea what that means. It's a place we used to have to go where you would buy a CD in order to listen to music. Think of a brick and mortar Spotify. I got that call, and they called me in for an interview, and it was my only shot to be able to keep a roof over my head. When I hung up the phone with them, I called my sponsor and I said, what do I say when they ask me about this 3-year gap in my resume? And he said, Mike, it's really simple. Just tell them the truth. I was like, I can't tell them the truth. If I tell them that I'm a drug addict and that's why I have a gap in my work history and I just got out of rehab and I need this job to stay in a halfway house, and if I don't get this job, I'm going to be out on the street, and if I'm out on the street, I'm going to relapse, and if I relapse, I'm fairly certain that I will die. Do you really think that's going to help me get the job? And he said, Mike, this isn't about the job. It's not about the halfway house. I know plenty of addicts that stay clean on the street. This is about whether you're willing to practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work, no matter how small the stakes, no matter how large the stakes. This is about whether you're willing to do whatever it takes to stay clean. Well, I was committed to staying clean, and so I found myself in that job interview the next day, and when we got to that section where he asked me about that 3-year gap in my resume, I wanted to wear my mask so badly. I knew how to lie. I wanted to tell him that I've been donating my time to help needy children, traveling the world with my parents, writing a book, anything other than I'm a drug addict. Now, if you're watching this, you may not be a drug addict, but everybody, and I mean everybody, has the thing about them that they are scared is the worst thing about them. The tragedy that they've had to overcome, the thing that they think other people will reject them for. And the last thing that we want to do is talk about that thing in a job interview. In the professional world, we're taught to hide our weaknesses in the professional world, not talk about the very worst thing about us when we need a job. Now, I didn't just need a job. I needed somewhere to live. I needed somewhere to stay. I needed to not relapse. I needed to not die. So everything was in that moment. So I practiced rigorous authenticity. I took my mask off. I surrendered the outcome. I let go of what he might say in return. And I did the uncomfortable work. And when I was done with that job interview, he looked at me, he smiled, and he said, when can you start? And that was the day that I learned that when it comes to sharing our true selves in the professional world, 99% of the worst things that ever happened to us happened only in our head. Because I got that job. And that set me off on a new career. So let's talk about these 3 principles. And let's talk about how they work as a system that anybody can use. You do not have to be a recovering addict. And it starts with practicing rigorous authenticity. You see, in that job interview, I had to be true to myself in word and action. That's what authenticity means. Now, we talk a lot about authenticity in this world. We talk about the fantasy and the illusion of authenticity. Everybody can point back to that safe moment in their life where they kept it real. But the question is, can you practice rigorous authenticity? Rigorous means strictly applied, no matter how low the stakes, no matter how high the stakes, whether you're in a job interview or whether no one's looking. Can you be true to yourself in word and action? Now, the truth is, most of us want to. And most of us technically can, but the reason that we wear a mask is because we haven't mastered the second principle, and that's surrender the outcome. You see, it's the fear of what will happen that makes us hide our true selves. An outcome is a result that we want or that we want to avoid, and the key is to surrender it. And so the way that we do that is we stop focusing on all the things that we can't control. For me in this example, I couldn't control that I was an addict. I couldn't control what my sponsor's suggestion was. I couldn't control whether the manager gave me the job and what he thought of me. But I could control whether I practiced these principles showed my true self. In that process, I reclaimed a tremendous amount of energy because I stopped worrying about all the things I couldn't control. I surrendered the outcome, and that's what allowed me to do uncomfortable work. Now, here's the thing about uncomfortable work, especially in the professional world. We're taught how to do hard work, and we're taught how to do smart work. You know, hard work and smart work, that's physical and that's intellectual. But uncomfortable work is emotional. And those of us that have had to overcome the weaknesses, the tragedies, the traumas in our life, we know a thing or two about uncomfortable work because that's emotional and it's something that you don't learn unless you go through it. And when I look out into the professional world, they say they know how to do uncomfortable work, but they don't. How many times have you seen someone doing 8 hours of hard work and smart work, avoiding 5 minutes of uncomfortable work? And so these 3 principles work together as a system, can allow anyone to live and lead mask-free. Now, the place where I had to test this theory the most was when I left that job at Sam Goody and I worked at a huge corporation, a Fortune 50 corporation with 88,000 employees. And when I got there, I was intimidated because when I looked around, there were all these wonderful, beautiful professionals in their suits and ties with their fancy degrees and fancy titles. And here I was, a kid from California that was a hippie with long hair and hoop earrings and flip-flops. And I felt different, but it wasn't because of the earrings and the flip-flops. It's because I was committed to living mask-free, but when I looked around, everybody in that room, in that organization was wearing a mask. Because see, professionals, we're taught that we have to wear a mask too. I wore a mask so that I could get high. They were wearing a mask so that they could achieve success. And I was tempted to wear a mask, but I couldn't because my life was on the line as a recovering addict. And so there are 4 masks that hold back the potential of every individual, every team, and every organization on this earth right now. These 4 masks literally are holding back the greatest potential in every person in every organization today. And these are the masks that I saw other people wearing that I wanted to wear but couldn't. And the first one is saying yes when you could say no. How many times have we seen someone say yes to a meeting, to a project, to a to-do list item that they knew that they needed to say no to save their time? I couldn't do that. I had to learn how to say no to drugs. And so I learned how to say no when people asked me to do things that I didn't need to do. People hide a weakness. You know, how many times have we been in a meeting where someone was unwilling to ask the question and say that they didn't understand what was going on? Or when asked a question, they refused to say, I don't know. Or the person that's trying to figure out how to use Microsoft Excel and they don't know how to do a pivot table. So they spend 20 hours on the weekend trying to figure out how to do it instead of raising their hand and saying, hey man, I need help, and taking 5 minutes of looking weak to learn a valuable skill. But when you are a drug addict and you own that weakness, owning a weakness like I don't understand this question or I don't know how to use Microsoft Excel isn't as scary. And as a result, I was able to grow faster than my peers because I was not scared to take that mask off. All over the world, people are avoiding difficult conversations, whether it's a conversation with your boss, a coworker, a customer, an employee, or even your significant other. People are avoiding difficult conversations because we're scared of what that means when we say something that someone else doesn't like. Well, I couldn't do that. You know what's uncomfortable? Is making amends. Being a drug addict and hurting people out there and going and making amends. So I knew a thing or two about avoiding difficult conversations. And I gained the skills in practicing these 3 principles to be able to have them, which meant my relationships were deeper and stronger. And there's holding back your unique perspective. This is the one that I hate to see the most. Everybody has a beautiful perspective that is unique to them, that allows them to identify blind spots in an organization or unlock innovation. But too many times we've seen everybody in a room trying to figure something out, and we only let the leader talk, and we only listen to their ideas. And we're scared to mention our own because we don't want to look stupid. Just like wearing flip-flops for a TED Talk. Well, you know what? My unique perspective, being a recovering addict, let me be comfortable with the discomfort of being different. And as a result, I was able to identify blind spots and unlock innovation. And none of this is special. This is just what addicts learn to do to recover. But it gave me a competitive advantage in corporate America. Now, did I feel different? Yes. Did I feel alone at times? Yes. And were there times that people took advantage of when I admitted a weakness? Yes. I lost a few battles. But when it came to the overall war, I won. I was promoted 8 times in 8 years. I went from being mentored by somebody to becoming their manager. Not because I had a college degree, not because I had connections, but because I practiced rigorous authenticity, surrendered the outcome, and I did uncomfortable work, and I lived and led mask-free. And that is why there is so much research out there right now that says that authenticity is a competitive advantage. People are begging for authentic products, authentic brands, authentic leaders, authentic teams, authentic companies, but we're not getting them. And it's because people don't know how to practice these 3 principles. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask myself was, let's put this to the test. I use these 3 principles in my career and to recover and to get that job at Sam Goody, but could I build an entire company on these 3 principles? Well, in 2010, at the height of the recession, I left my cushy Fortune 50 job and I co-founded a startup called InQuicker, where our mission was to reinvent access to healthcare by allowing patients to digitally self-schedule appointments online through a mobile device in 30 seconds or less. And we should have failed. It was the height of the recession. We had no investors. I maxed out my credit card, drained my bank account. I'd never worked in healthcare before, never been an entrepreneur before. And yet, we had one competitive advantage that our competitors did not have. We went up against companies with 150 million in venture capital and 10 times the employees that we had. We went up against companies with patents and connections and advisors that we did not have, but we had the one thing they didn't have: a mask-free culture. And so my employees, when it came to saying yes, when you could say no, they didn't have to do that. They were empowered to say no to me, to each other, and to our customers. And as a result, only the most important things got done. My team was not scared to have the difficult conversation and make people uncomfortable in a meeting. Instead of having 7 meetings to get to the root cause, we got to the root cause in 1 meeting. And when it comes to hiding a weakness, my team was not scared to expose their weaknesses, because I, as CEO, would go to them every week, just like I would go to my sponsor, and tell them what my greatest weakness was. And not after I had resolved it, when I was in the middle of it. And after a while, they realized they can declare their weakness as well. Imagine a whole organization not wasting time hiding weaknesses, but spending time helping each other grow their weakness. And instead of just listening to the CEO or the executive team identify blind spots or unlock innovation and strategic plan, we activated everybody, because there was no politics, there was no hierarchy, there was no ego, there was no power struggle. We were all just people living and leading mask-free. And so we got the power of everybody's ideas. So we had less blind spots and more innovation than our competitors. And as a result of all of this one competitive advantage, living and leading mask-free, we grew 20,000% in 6 years, became an Inc. 500 company even though we were bootstrapped in a recession, won multiple Best Place to Work awards, didn't have any negative attrition, and ultimately were acquired by a publicly traded company. All because 50 beautiful individuals knew how to lead themselves, knew how to reclaim energy, and knew how to thrive, not just as professionals, but as people. And so then after I sold my company, I asked myself, was this an isolated incident? Am I just really lucky? And so I decided to take everything that I had done using these 3 principles and packaged it up into a TED Talk. And in 2018, I gave a TEDx talk titled, "Great Leaders Do What Drug Addicts Do." And I was scared to share my story. I was scared to share that biggest weakness and position it as a strength. Well, guess what? I guess there's a lot of people out there that are scared of other people seeing their weakness, and that they want to be able to see it as a strength, because that TED Talk's now the #1 TEDx talk in the history of TEDx Nashville, with over 1.3 million views around the world. And I get messages all the time from people that see the power in owning their weakness and turning it into their strength, taking off the mask and living and leading mask-free. You know, when we think about these 3 principles, I've had the honor to be able to coach a lot of different people now. And so just a couple of case studies. I've got one person, her name is Emily, who is a consultant. She's supposed to have all the answers and supposed to agree with her customer. And she didn't hold back her unique perspective in a meeting. And she, and I quote, did 5 minutes of uncomfortable work that saved her team 20 hours and gave her customer a $5 million benefit. On the other side of the equation, I went in to a company that is a global company that had a $20 billion merger for the CIO, and I spent 90 minutes with his team that manages 6,000 employees around the world. And he said that we equipped them with the language to talk about the things, the masks, that were holding back their company's performance. Caroline Dilbeck is somebody who went through my workshop. I take these 3 principles and I teach them step by step in a way that you can execute them in 1 minute a day. And what she realized going through my workshop was that she was holding back her unique perspective. You see, she was a registered nurse who had just gotten her master's in business, and yet she wanted to leave her corporate career because she had just had a son. And she wanted to spend time with her son and become an entrepreneur and start a home organizing business. And she felt shame over that desire. It's not what you do when you just got an MBA. Well, thanks to these 3 principles, she left her job, and now she's not only a successful mom, she's a successful entrepreneur. And even today, as things are really tough, she's learned how to focus on what she can control by learning to surrender the outcome. Now, I've said all this and I've shared my story, not because I want you to think I'm special, because I'm not. I've just been doing what recovering drug addicts do. 80 years ago, there was not a solution for an addict. You ended up in jails, institutions, or death. And then we were taught some principles that millions of addicts around the world practice in order to recover and lead themselves, reclaim energy, and thrive. So it's not me that's special. It's these 3 principles that are special. And all I did was take something that was typically applied to addiction recovery, and I integrated with my experience in retail, leading a nonprofit, corporate America, and as an entrepreneur, and distilled it down into these 3 principles that anyone can practice. Now, if you don't think that you need these principles and you don't think that we live in a masked world, all you have to do is look on social media. We post pictures online and we have a very convenient option that allows us literally to change the way we look, create a mask. We live in a masked world. Companies are dealing with masks. I've worked with some of the best, Google and Dell, nonprofits like the Women Presidents Organization or EO, startups. And I've had the opportunity to give an assessment, an authenticity assessment to CEOs, executives, managers, frontline employees, stay-at-home parents, solopreneurs, freelancers, you name it. And guess what? 90% of leaders report wearing a mask at work. This is the single greatest thing holding all of our collective potential back. And so when you think about your life and you think about what this means for you, everything comes down to the decision between a masked life and a mask-free life. It's not about the one big moment, the Lamborghini moment. It's about chopping up that Lamborghini into a million little pieces in every little decision and choosing to take that mask off and live and lead mask-free. In your professional life, a masked life means writing and rewriting an email for 2 hours, agreeing to impossible expectations, maintaining the status quo. A mask-free life, that means you can pivot or create products, support and motivate your team, make an impact on your customer. Or on the personal side, a masked life means we're checking our phone every 5 minutes to see what people thought about what we said on social media, or if the boss is emailing us, or what the customer said. It's why we work on the weekends. It's why we let our potential go unfulfilled, worrying too much about what other people think. But when we live mask-free, we have more time to spend with our family and friends, more time to work out, meditate, and sleep, and more time to experience genuine fulfillment in our career because we stop holding back our unique perspective. Now, I want to help you on your mask-free journey, so I'm going to give you a gift. If you text mask-free to 33777, I'm going to send you our mask assessments. Normally $30, but you text it to us, it's free. And then I'm also going to send you an intro to my book, Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts, where I've taken these 3 principles and broken them down into a step-by-step system where you can learn how to live mask-free in 1 minute a day. Because we do need to be equipped to fight this battle. And make no mistake about it, it is an age-old battle. And the quote that sums it up the best is a quote from E. Cummings. To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best, day and night to make you like everybody else, means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting. We remember the people that fought this battle. Think Winston Churchill let what other people think stop him from taking the next right action during a war? Did Abraham Lincoln let what his own political party thought stop him from leading himself? Did Rosa Parks let what other people think stop her from moving to the front of the bus and changing history? All 3 of those people, and you, can know how to lead yourself, how to reclaim time and stop wasting it on what other people think, and thrive in a way you never imagined and work in life. It just comes down to practicing the 3 principles that drug addicts know how to practice. Practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work. Now, when I was young, they taught me that to become a drug addict had to be one of the worst things that I could ever become. And so when I became one, I felt incredible shame. And I wanted to hide that part of me from the world, from the people that I loved. Well, today, I stand before you, and being a drug addict, that's the best thing about me. It is the number one thing I want anyone to know about who I am. When I do my prayers in the morning and I talk to God about my addiction, I thank Him for my addiction before I ever start talking to Him about my recovery. Because here's why. My addiction, the worst thing about me, my stigma, it's a freaking superpower. Because I have 2 things that the most leaders in this world do not have. The first one is incentive. I have to practice these 3 principles in order to live. And as a result, I just by default am able to practice principles that make me a great leader. But number 2, I have an opportunity to practice. You see, unlike most leaders that get their training from an MBA or a corporate training, I've gone to 2000 12-step meetings that are free and practice how to live and lead mask-free with other recovering addicts that are doing the same. Now, another thing that I was taught when I was young was what a great leader is. We're taught who the great leaders are and how to become them. We aren't taught how to be our true selves, and that doing that will make us a great leader. And when I thought of a great leader, I thought of someone that was stoic and strong and didn't admit weakness. But now, as I've worked with recovering addicts and leaders around the world, our next generation of great leaders are not the ones that pretend that they aren't human and hide their humanity behind a mask. It's the leaders that lead themselves and show us who they truly are and take the mask off. And in the process, truly become a great leader. Now, if you're out there and you've got something that you think is holding you back, that you think is the worst thing about you, something that you've had to overcome, I'm telling you, it's the best thing about you. Because once you own that weakness, you can do anything. I once had a weakness that I thought was a stigma, that the world told me was a stigma. And now I'm sitting here, not special, but practicing 3 principles that made that weakness and that stigma a superpower. And you can do the same. And maybe now you understand why great leaders live like drug addicts. Thank you.
Hi there.
What I want to say to you right now is that you are a sight for sore eyes. I remember a teacher telling my class that after we came back from Christmas break when I was in high school one year, and it meant the world to me. The thought that she had missed seeing me when she was away on Christmas break. And boy, do I miss seeing you. I had great anticipation, and all of the friends and colleagues and people that I love and know from so many aspects of life were going to be at this event, the Live Intentionally event. And I am aching in my heart that I am not getting to look into your eyes and hold your face and give you big hugs right now. So, whatever that could possibly be transmitted through this camera to you, wherever you are watching this today, I hope that it does. My name is Jenny Black, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Tennessee. And my obsession is basically how our use of personal media impacts our mental health. And boy, if that was not a relevant conversation before this, it has become a conversation that is on the top of everyone's minds during social distancing. So we only have 30 minutes to dive into some concepts that I truly believe if you understood them, if you can understand them, learn about them, and apply them to your unique situation, could radically improve the quality of your life and the quality of your experiences in your virtual spaces. So we're going to talk about three different things. The first one is going to be something that we are all struggling with right now. It's a term called continuous partial attention. If you have never heard of that term before, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. We're going to dive into that. The second idea we're going to talk about is that continuous partial attention is caused by the fact that all of us are living in two different cultures simultaneously. We all are required to live in our human world, in the culture that values everything that is human. And most all of us are required to live in the digital world and value all of the things that help us to function productively and effectively in virtual spaces. Then finally, we're going to explore some resources and tools, ways that you could approach your daily life in a way that, number one, your human needs are being cared for. And number two, that you're able to do the work or school or connection that the digital spaces give us the possibility of doing from a place of wholeness and productivity in a way that really, that during this time you can live in a way that's very satisfying to you and cares for your mental health during this time. So, okay, let's dive in. Oh, except before we dive in, what I want you to do is to take just a little minute to think about the last time that you were totally at peace, that you felt complete contentment. Think about that moment. And what was that moment for you? For me, yesterday morning, I woke up before anyone else in my house woke up. The dishes were piled up from the night before. We don't have a dishwasher where we're living. And I opened up the window above my kitchen sink and I lit a candle and I filled the left side of my sink with soapy hot water and the right side with clean, crisp, clear rinse water. And I laid out a clean laundry towel and I proceeded to wash my dishes. I was listening to the birds, feeling outside my window. I was feeling the warmth of the water on my hand. I was experiencing the accomplishment of these dirty dishes becoming clean, like some magical thing I have the power to do as a human. And I was aware that I had not felt that happy and content or at peace in years. And a lot of times I'll describe to my clients, we all have this like kind of spinning top that's going off all the time deep inside. And it just felt like it finally stopped spinning and it just stood there. And those kinds of moments, which I hope that this time that we've all been going through has been an invitation for you to get to experience them. Those are moments where our bodies and our minds are in exactly the same place. This is exactly the opposite of continuous partial attention. So, like I said, you already know what it is without me having to describe it. It's when your mind is in 100 places at all the same time. So, let's say right now, while you're watching this, there's probably a really good chance that that's not the only thing happening in the room that you're in. That you could likely be watching this on a laptop while you have a social media scroll open. You could have children running around in the room. You could have headphones trying to focus on what you're hearing and seeing and trying to block out what's around you. But there's a ton of stuff always going on all of the time. And our attention is being pulled at in 100 different directions of where we could be, where we should be, or all the things we're managing at the same time. This term, continuous partial attention, was coined by a woman named Linda Stone. She's impressive and talk about ahead of her time. She coined this term 20 years ago. And the article that I read about it, she was referencing MySpace. So I bet she has a lot to say about this right now. She runs a website called theattentionproject.com, and it is worth looking into. Okay, so continuous partial attention is when, use my papers, it is when we are always on, when we are anywhere, anytime, any place, and it is when we have an artificial sense of crisis. So one of there's been tons of research done around this. One of the things I think is the most fascinating is that some of this research has shown that when parents are on their devices and their kids are around, it doesn't matter what they're doing. If they were playing Candy Crush or if they were working on a big report for work, that the way that they engage with their children is the same way that alcoholics respond. And I know all of you can relate to this because you don't hear what's going on. You're trying to get something done and you're fighting and fighting and fighting to get your attention on this thing. And this problem that's happening outside of you in the real world starts escalating because it's not getting enough of your attention. And so then you reactively kind of whip out like overreacting, overly angry, more severe consequences than you would have given if you had heard what your child, the buy for attention that your child was giving you at that time. So again, this is absolutely, I don't even think I've said this one time, there is no judgment when it comes to this. What we are all navigating right now is unparalleled. The things that are fighting for our attention and the stresses that we are experiencing both inside of our homes and outside in our worlds are tremendous. None of us are handling this in any way that is the right way to handle it. We're all figuring it out. And all of this information is intended to be education for you to be able to make the best decisions you can make for you and your family based on the circumstances that you're facing right now. And no one else can tell you what that is. And you deserve a tremendous amount of compassion and huge Olympic level awards for surviving a day right now. So congratulations to you. But the reality is that when we live in this state of continuous partial attention, we start to exhibit these symptoms. So this is where the term media trauma comes from. I was noticing that the very ways in which we engage with our technology and the ways in which it triggers us are causing us to have symptoms of trauma, even though nothing traumatic has to be taking place. So if we're living in these two different spaces all the time, trying to always be on, be anywhere all the time, and everything is stressful, we are going to be overstimulated, overwhelmed. Everything feels like a crisis. We will be compromised in our abilities to solve problems or even see what real problems are. We don't have the ability to reflect. We can't make decisions. We can't think creatively, and for whatever reason, what makes me the most sad is we lose our sense of any kind of fulfillment in the work that we are doing because we're never able to fully give ourselves to that work. So that's a little summary of what continuous partial attention is and the consequences that it has on us. So we're going to go a little deeper and talk about why continuous partial attention is such a significant part of all of our lives right now. So we live in two worlds. We live in the human world. The human world that's about the person, that's about relationships, real time, real spaces, our environment, our nature, our homes. And then we also live in these digital spaces, and that we can be anywhere on these magical Zoom meetings where we can talk to people all over the world and have fancy fun backgrounds so they can't see our piled up laundry in the back. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to compare and contrast these two different worlds. So this is such a key. If you can really let this information sink in, it will change the way you engage with your digital spaces. So pretend every single time that you get on a screen or in a screen, every single time you do that, you are leaving the culture that you grew up in and that you understand to get into a different culture that has totally different rules that some of us understand better than others, but they're different rules. So if I were here today in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm going to do all the very Nashville things that are acceptable in Nashville. We're very friendly here, and when someone asks us how we're doing, we're always fine. And when someone asks us if that bothers us, we always say, of course not. So I'm going to get on a plane, and I am going to go to, where do I want to go? I'm going to go to Ghana. My daughter just went to Ghana last semester, and so I know more about Ghana than a lot of other places right now, but hardly anything. So I'm going to get on a plane. When I get off that plane in Ghana, I have to do things totally different than I would ever do. For instance, one of the first things that my daughter was warned about, the Ghanaians it's such an incredibly friendly culture. And everybody wants to be friends, and everybody is friends. You give your number to absolutely everyone you meet, and you end up getting together with them at some point and hanging out and having a good time. So it's an incredibly relational culture. But if someone asks you, hey, if they want to give you something, you say yes. I would like to receive that, whether you want to receive that or not, because you're receiving the goodness of their culture. And then you very quickly might be asked to pay for that. So you have to know and understand and learn these things to be in that culture. We have the two cultures of our digital world and our human world have become merged so gradually, and at the same time so all-consumedly, that we have a very hard time seeing that there are two different worlds. When we live in this world, these things work this way. When we live in this world, things work this way. When we try to apply the values of one world to the other world, we will suffer. We are suffering, and we have suffered from that. So I'm going to dive into a little bit of what those are. In the human world, the values are we. It's always about we. In the digital world, it's always about me. I am there to use technology, or it is a transactional relationship. In the human world, we're always giving and receiving. We are always giving and receiving all of the time. It is never a one-way track. In the technology space, we're consuming. We're there to consume. It's there for us, and we're consuming it. Or we're creating the thing that someone else is consuming. In the human world, it's always about less. We have less options. We have less distractions. We have to choose carefully what it is. If I were with you all right now at the Live Intentionally conference, every person I saw, when I saw you, I would look just at you. And when I was looking in your eyes and seeing how you're doing and connecting with you in that moment, I wouldn't be seeing everyone else. That's how the real world operates. However, because this is going to be a virtual opportunity, I'm going to see more people. So I see no one. I'm looking at a camera right now. But in the reality is it's going to appear as if I'm getting to talk to more people because of technology. In the human world, it's always about acceptance. The joke that I always make is that all of us had some uncle who had politics that we didn't agree with. And we saw him every Thanksgiving, and boy, we disagreed with him, but we really loved that uncle. And that's how it is in the real world. You understand that people are so much more than their opinions or their beliefs or the stupid things that they might say on any given moment. And we learn to accept each other. And we also learn that I'm more than the stupid thing I said or what I believe today or how many likes my post got. So it's always about acceptance. In the world of technology, it's about better. It's always about something being better than it was before, including me. I have an opportunity here to stop and re-record and edit and make sure this piece of my hair isn't flying out this way in a way I wouldn't have the option to do if I were with you in real time, which I think would be better. In the human world, things go slowly. Every single thing that matters, and my favorite is human development and human connection, are slow. They go so slowly. Everything in the human world that matters requires time and attention. In the digital world, you can go viral overnight. You can be amazing. You can be a millionaire. Everything can happen so fast. And that's the rule of the digital. And you got to get on it. You got to get on it because you don't want to miss your moment. In the human world, we have to learn how to embrace mystery and paradox. We have to see that everything isn't as it seems. I would say social distancing is the epitome of mystery and paradox. We have a global crisis and it's devastating. And then there are these beautiful things that are being given more time and space to express themselves. And that's mystery and paradox. In the digital spaces, we want answers and we get answers. And they are black and white answers. And in the human world, sometimes. The human world is sometimes. Sometimes I'm in the mood for this. Sometimes I can work this hard. Sometimes I can go outside. Sometimes I need to stay in. In the virtual world, it's always there. So in the real world, if I want to have a hard conversation with someone in my house who I'm living with right now, that doesn't mean they're going to be available to talk whenever I want to talk. But in virtual spaces, there's always somebody out there anytime that I have a need to connect. So that work, I meant to say at the beginning, that is credited to Alexandra Solomon. She does amazing work on dating and relationships within the world of social media. And I believe her work has some deep applications to all of our work that we do, how we work, how we play, and how we connect with people in the world of technology. So I would like to maybe dive into some more details on giving and receiving. Choosing less. Yes, specifically I wanted to talk about this during social distancing. So when we are in real time with real people, we are able to give and receive like literally by being in the same space. Like we don't have to say or do anything to be feeding off of each other's energy. Like I think one of the things I thought most of this conversation was going to be about before COVID-19 was the importance of human connection. And I'll take just a little bit of time. I don't think so many people need me to remind them of the importance of human connection. The reality is that we had lost a great deal of human connection before social distancing. there was no one I talked to, either professionally or personally, that wasn't suffering from deep loneliness and this longing to have a real connection with another human. So social distancing has, in some strange ways, in beautiful ways, we have seen social media being used for human connection in a way that I think we were all trying to use it as in the beginning. And that's been really amazing. Like right now, I have a weekly Zoom date with two of my best friends from high school, and we are connecting in a way that we haven't connected since we were in high school. And what an incredible gift. But one of the things that I want you to know about giving and receiving is that it's not as hard as you think that it is. Don't set your standards too high. Like if you're walking in your neighborhood and you see your neighbor from the distance and you give them a wave and a hello and are you doing okay? Thinking about you. That does something to our bodies biologically that doesn't need this deep heart connection. We need to know that we're seen, and we need to see. We need to see those who are around us. In terms of consuming, or I'm contrasting that with consuming in the digital world, I think that it's very, in all these amazing things that are happening, I feel like every day I hear 10 more wonderful art classes, dance classes. The Hamilton crew got together and did their show virtually. I mean, so many amazing things. We can move to that position of being a constant consumer in our own lives. And the reason it's really, really important to not be a consumer isn't because there's any shame in being a consumer. It's been just wonderful having these resources at our hands. It's because our bodies so deeply need to participate in life. And the more that we consume, the more that we look to more things to consume, as opposed to giving our minds time and space to get disconnected from that overstimulation and get reconnected to our own abilities to be creative and to produce. Okay, the other thing I really wanted to talk about was the concept of less. I want to challenge you in this time of social distancing to spend as many hours a day possible not on a screen. If you are doing school or working in digital spaces during social distancing, I highly, highly recommend you to spend as little of your other time as you have available to you in a day off of a screen. This is so important. Please understand, this is not just like, oh gosh, you've been on a screen, you need to get off. The way that your mind, your mental capacity is hijacked and taxed during being digital spaces, and the inability that we have to complete jobs and end things, kind of the endless scroll aspect of the digital world, is very, very, very hard on your mind. The other thing that's really hard on your mind about working in digital spaces is that, well, it's really hard on your body. So your mind is working at these exponential rates and your body is doing nothing at all. We actually have scientific evidence now that when you're in digital spaces, you physically leave your body. So you leave your feelings, you leave your sensations like hunger, needing to use the bathroom, feeling a certain muscle that might be stressed by the position that you're in. You're not going to feel any of that until you get out of your digital space, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom. Oh my gosh, I'm starving. Oh my gosh, my back hurts so bad. So one of the challenges that I've been giving to myself that I would like to extend to you is during this incredibly significant time of trauma in our culture and in our world, it is really important that you give your body as much opportunity as possible to work as hard as your brain. When our brains are working harder than our bodies are, we will start to see consequences emotionally. That's where you're going to start to have a lot of anxiety building up because your body has got to get this energy out of it. So less screen times, my beautiful friends, as little as possible. The real world has got some really challenging things in it right now. Very, very hard things. And if you are not tending to it, you're not going to do well during this time. So the challenges that are in our real world are also matched, my friends, by the gifts that the real world has to offer us. And so in our last few minutes together, I want to tell you that this information that I have for you right now is not just things that heal media trauma and help heal us from time spent in too many worlds on too many devices, partially parceling out our attention all of the time, helps us get our mind back into our bodies and into our realities. But it also helps heal trauma that pre-existed before what we're going through right now. So if you have trauma in your past, or if you are experiencing trauma in the present, like most of us are, these are the 4 things that have come up in all of my research over and over and over again about the things that heal us. So the first one is if you are engaging with technology during this time, and you will be from this point on in your life. Time is your number 1 boundary. You need a beginning time and you need an end time. And when you're in those digital spaces, get done what needs to get done, what needs to be gotten done. You need to, if you're taking an online class, pay attention in that online class. Give your brain a chance to stay in one place. If you're doing something really tedious and boring, like hitting a button over and over again like a robot, then put on a podcast and let your mind get into the zone of something, one thing at a time. The second one is nature. You guys, nature heals us. When we are outside, the way that our 5 senses are engaged, it is the most powerful antidote to the harm caused by screens, because our eyes were made to take in the complexities of the fractals all around us in nature. Get outside as much as you can. And if there is any way that if you are doing work online and you can do it outside, that is a win-win. Do it outside. 3, I already talked about this earlier, and that's the concept of movement. Your body has to move. The more stress that your mind is going through, or that your culture is going through, your body was made to have a physical reaction to that. And if it does not have a chance to respond to that, it's going to get stored as trauma in your body. A great resource for this is Yoga with Adriene. Has an amazing yoga class for PTSD that I highly recommend to everyone. But also just get out and walk. Dance. Join an Instagram dance party. Move your body. The third one is human connection. That is really important in 2 different ways. Immediately you understand the idea of human connection like never before, because we miss each other so much. Like I'm missing you right now. And that connection that we have in face-to-face environments. We need the human connection. And really, animals are a very great source for this too. Any kind of connection of I see you, you see me. And but way more essentially is the connection you have with yourself. This is an invitation to connect with yourself in a way that you never have before. And in making that human connection, you will be able to use your Zoom sessions and your social media to connect from a genuine place that will be fulfilling when you invest in it. And the last one is my favorite one. I asked a group of students from all over the world how many of them had a healthy relationship with their technology. Few of them raised their hand, and I said, please come talk to me after this. I want to hear your secrets. This 14-year-old boy came up to me and he said, I don't have a great relationship with my phone. I don't have the healthy boundaries with it, but my best friend does, and I think I know the secret. I was like, what? Tell me. And he said, I think it's hobbies. And my mouth just like fell open. And I was like, that's what I've been discovering. Almost all the research that I'm finding is saying we need hobbies. Hobbies give our brain exactly what they're looking for, this little thing to fiddle with and learn about. And the part of our brain that we get into when we are trying to learn how to do something new or giving ourselves completely to this tiny little coloring that I've been doing lately, it makes our brain go, it leaves the part of our brain where trauma is, and it is a tremendous healing agent. So what better time for you to find a hobby than right now while you are being socially isolated, and make it as easy and accessible as possible. If your coloring book and pens, if your little piece of wood and a whittling knife, if your chess game, set it out. Let everything be out so that they're easier to pick up than your phone, because it will take care of you. It will heal you. And I've got to wrap up because our 30 minutes have come to an end. But thank you for inviting me into your life for this time. Much love and many prayers to you.
Hello, my name is Pike Williams. I'm a staff therapist at the Refuge Center for Counseling. I'm excited to be with you here today to talk about this topic that I have really become passionate about. We're talking about connection and after trauma, and I just am very excited about this particular topic as it relates to that. So, we've all had the experience of maybe not being able to sleep at night because our mind was just so active, or perhaps just certain thoughts, we couldn't get them out of our mind no matter what we tried, or we just noticed that we have the best of intentions of being a certain way when we go home, but when we get there, we find ourselves acting in a different way. Well, I think we've all had similar experiences, and the problem is we don't always have a chance to have an opportunity to sort of open that up a little bit and look at it. So that's what we're going to do here today with a topic that is called internal family systems. A little bit more about that in a minute. I've tried to title this topic, Caring for Ourselves by Caring for Our Parts. And so let me just kind of move to the next slide and share with you just a little bit, some background here. A man named Richard Schwartz back in the 1980s began to notice as he worked with his clients, he was a therapist, he started noticing that many of them would use language like, well, there's a part of me that wanted to go to the party, but there's a part of me that didn't want to go. Or there was a part of me that wanted to break up with her, but there was another part that just wouldn't let me. And as Schwartz noticed that over the years, he began to explore that further with his clients. And he would be the first to say that this therapy model is really a model that was birthed because of the things he learned from his clients. And I love that because this is really something for all of us. I'm going to offer the idea here for you to consider that all of us have internal family systems, and I'll explain that in a minute, in our mind. We just don't always talk about it, or we don't have a concept or a model to sort of unpack it. So that's what we'll be doing here. There are two powerful ideas with this model that Richard Schwartz sort of sets forth. The first one is the idea that the human mind is best characterized by plurality or multiplicity as compared or contrasted with sort of a unitary view. And the second important idea is the idea of systems, or taking a systemic view. And that's simply the thought that we all affect others and we're all affected by others. And as we think about perhaps a multiplicity of parts in our mind, or we might think of them as sub-personalities or even different aspects to who we are, the fact that all these parts are connected to one another, and they also are impacted by the parts of other people. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. This idea that we all have multiple parts residing, or multiple subpersonalities residing in our brain, can be a little strange to us when we hear it like that. But first of all, let me just share what a couple of the advantages of this are. First of all, this model is very strengths-based. It's very affirming. In other words, it conveys the idea that people are all capable of being different than they may be today. In other words, that we all have within us what we need to be healthy people. Sometimes, however, there are certain aspects of the way we think or parts in our mind that have become problematic or difficult, that it's inhibiting our development. But that's against a backdrop that all of us are equipped with everything we need. And it also allows us to have grace for ourselves as well as other people. There are definitely times when I have a bad day, and other people experience that. And for me to be able to say, it's true, I had a part that was really active and it wasn't very pretty. And it also allows me to quickly forgive others, perhaps when they have been difficult for me to be with. And I want to just say, that's a bad person, or that's a bad guy or a bad woman. Rather than say that, I can kind of get in a space where, no, they probably were having a bad day too, and there's a part of them that somehow was triggered. And I'm not abdicating responsibility here in any way of our parts, but we are just acknowledging that there is more to us than just one experience or one part. So I'm really wanting to try to advance that idea with you. These parts or subpersonalities can easily be identified by sort of repeating patterns of behavior or thoughts. And so we will have a little exercise later that you can consider trying yourself as you think about identifying your own parts. But these parts are easily identifiable if we slow down enough to do that. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Psalm 46:10, talks about being still and knowing God. Well, that sounds good, but for me to be still, I don't know about you, but when I'm still, a lot happens. There's a lot of thoughts that come right there, like, well, look, if we're just going to sit here, we might as well check our email, right? Or why are you sitting here? We have things to do. So being still is not easy. Sometimes going to sleep is not easy because of the invasion, we could say, of these active parts. So we just want to acknowledge that. I do want to make a couple of things really clear here. This is not a new concept in psychotherapy. Multiple or multiplicity goes all the way back to Freud. He postulated the idea of an id and ego and superego. Many other therapists and models kind of hold space for, such as CBT holds space for something called schemas. Transactional analysis allows space for ego states. So this is not a new idea. It's simply a very practical idea that's based and rooted in client experience and reports. It is actually also a well-researched and is growing all the time, a well-researched modality that's experiential-based and evidence-based, sorry, what I meant to say, but also through experience with clients and research. So it is recognized as such, and that body of work is growing all the time in terms of its impact, positive impact on clients and us and our lives. So really grateful for that. A couple of other things I want to stress here. Our parts are not a product of some external influence or a consequence of past trauma. In other words, the parts have always been there. They may become activated by some experience or trauma that we've had, but they've always been there. And then this point too is especially important. The idea that this is not dissociative identity disorder. Some of you might know that as multiple personality disorder. It's nothing like that. And just so you know that, I just want to ease your mind. All we're talking about is a landscape within a healthy mind where multiple parts are present. DID is actually characterized by many extreme observable behaviors, including amnesia, both of the trauma and everyday life. And that is definitely not what we're talking about here. So just want to ease your mind there a little bit. So let me just talk a little bit more about parts. Let me introduce you to the concept of self. Richard Schwartz advances the idea of self as a way of describing that best part of us. We might think of it as if we are a Christian or someone who believes in Christ or the Bible, we might think of that as a place where maybe God or the Holy Spirit lives within me. Other people who may not have that belief system, they may simply think of this as the very best version of themselves. This is that space when we're at our best, simply stated, and he calls that the self. He defines it as the seat of consciousness, and it's the only inner entity where or which has the kind of the ability to orchestrate, to care and support the inner family of parts. And this is a real important idea. I'll illustrate that in just a second. The goal of the internal family systems approach, or parts, is the idea of unburdening problematic parts of their extreme beliefs by restoring trust in the leadership of the self. Okay, so that's the thought, which is we may have parts that start to overfunction because they become burdened and they feel like they need to lead because they feel like the leader is no longer trustworthy or able to lead. And maybe I will use an example here. We'll just think of an orchestra that has a conductor. And for some reason, the conductor's not here today. And he's delayed or she's delayed, maybe due to traffic, or maybe they're sick today. We don't know, but the orchestra's there and they're all gathered. They are growing impatient because no one is here, and they're ready to play. They came to play, they're ready to play. After a few minutes, finally, the tuba player has had enough. And so he decides, I'm just going to start playing. Somebody said they wanted to hear a song, I'm just going to start playing. So the tuba player breaks out in a solo. And he cranks, and he plays, and there's no space for the rest of the orchestra to play or do anything. All they can do is watch the tuba player play. Well, after a few minutes, lo and behold, the conductor shows up, and he was delayed, but he's here now. And so he tells the orchestra, please take a break. I'd like to talk with the tuba player for a few minutes. And as the tuba player makes his way up to the conductor's stand and the other orchestra players file out, the conductor notices that some of the orchestra players have a really angry look on their face, maybe a hurt look on their face, and they mutter as they go by to the conductor, I hope you straighten him out, referring to the tuba player. And so that metaphor is sort of an example of inner dialogue, where we may have a part that will occupy the leadership position, which creates consternation, could say it that way, to the other parts who are not trusting that particular part to lead, and it creates internal confusion and discord. And I also want to offer here just a biblical perspective briefly, because as we think about this for a moment, we are going to wonder, really we might think about this regarding any psychotherapy model. Is this congruent with what we might know or think about what we believe with, let's say, biblical writings? Is this congruent with that or not? And I would just, I don't have time to get into that today, but I would simply ask you to think about the pluralities that we know that are in Scripture. The Trinity of God, we might think about in creation, the plurality of creation, and we can think about numerous examples of people in the Bible who they were one way one time and they were another way another time. Peter comes to mind for me. He's very brash and courageous at one moment, and later on Easter we think about him a little bit because he disavowed any knowledge of Jesus. And so we can all relate to that a little bit perhaps. So I just want to offer that, and because this model can trigger in any of us some skepticism. I'm a 6 on the Enneagram, and I have a healthy amount of skepticism anyway. And I just want you to know I'm not the first one to want to explore this model and others in a biblical context. So there's more information about that. In fact, one of the book references I'll give you at the end was written by a woman named Mary Steege. She was a priest in the Presbyterian Church, and she wrote the book to integrate parts and biblical teaching. And the title of the book is The Spirit-Led Life, and it's really her way of saying the self-led life, but with sort of an integration of sort of a biblical approach there. So you can explore that more later, but just wanted to mention that in passing. I'd like to shift to another book for these next few slides here that, again, is on the list of references. It's called Parts Work, and I want to thank the artist in this book because she's given me permission to use some of her drawings for these slides. And I'm going to use some of the pictures to further explain the model just a little bit. First of all, on this slide, you'll notice that there are several parts in the picture, and that these parts are there they are activated to help us adapt to physical, psychological, or social needs that sort of pop up. If you notice in the picture, you'll notice a woman that has multiple arms. She seems to be very, very productive. We've all felt like that. I just don't have quite enough arms to get everything done. There's a man there doing some shopping. He really is trying to make his list and prepare for shopping. There's a woman there who appears to be a really good student. She's anxious to learn. And there are other characters in the pictures, including sort of a good mom part. And so we're just noticing all these parts just in this picture. Hopefully you can resonate with one or more of them. One of the key points or foundations of parts is this idea that all of our parts are good. There are no bad parts. That's not to say that sometimes our parts are not over-functioning or functioning in a way that's not helpful, and then sometimes they function in ways that are actually dysfunctional. We'll talk about that. But at the core, we want to take a stance that all the parts are good, and they just need to be given the opportunity to be restored or resume their normal and desired way of functioning. I will just mention this point. Our parts, they activate in response to key events in our lives, and some of our parts may become wounded over time, particularly from traumatic experiences. Let's say when you're young, someone makes fun of you and they say that you're too heavy or you're unattractive because you're so heavy. That's the kind of thing that hurts terribly to hear that, and for some people that sort of is a wound to a part that becomes a burden that grows over time. And we'll talk more about that as an example maybe later. Another way to say that is, what was once the solution has now become the symptom. And I'll illustrate that this way. In my story, I was a Boy Scout when I was young. And some of you may know the motto of the Scouts is to be prepared. When I was young, my mom wanted me to be over-prepared so I would be prepared. And so I learned young to always be prepared. And that served me well when I was a scout and even through high school, trying to pass school and also starting to compete in athletics. Being prepared is a big idea. Really grateful I had a part like that. Went on to college, engineering school. Really glad I had a part like that. And then professionally, it was really helpful. So that part was there with me through all that. And it helped me when I met my wife and married her, became a father of children, and then adolescents, and then adult children. So having a part like that's great. But sometimes when things like our current circumstances happen, a part like that can become burdened and start to feel like, I don't know how to prepare for this. I don't know what to do about this. I know what, I will just go to the store and buy everything I can. Hoard. We've seen examples of that. I've done some of that. Maybe you have. Okay. And so if I leave that part alone, I can begin to show behaviors that an outsider would say, selfish, self-centered. Those can show up. And it's simply manifestation of a be prepared part that's become overly burdened and is over-functioning. So maybe that helps sort of clarify a little bit about the problem that we can sometimes have in our life when some of these parts that are normally very healthy, very valuable, they can become burdened because of circumstances or things that happen to us. Let me just go to ask you to this next slide, asks you sort of to consider the metaphor of a living room. So if you can think a living room being the forefront of your mind. And in the living room, there are certain conditions in there, temperature and so forth. But when the conditions in the living room are just right, one or more parts will emerge. So I mentioned before just the idea that sometimes we go home. Maybe we're adults now, but we go home to visit family. And sometimes that's a wonderful experience, and we can't wait to do that again. Sometimes, though, some of us notice that, you know what, gosh, when I go home, I become a different person. Okay, and in a situation like that, we might say the conditions in this metaphorical living room have changed. And so the part of me that shows up is maybe the little boy version of me, or a young man version of me that takes a lot of guidance from a parent, stuff like that. And so just noticing we have a living room, and sometimes these parts enter in invited, sometimes they're uninvited, like the tuba player. They sort of crash the party and take lead even when we really don't want them to. One other note here is that our parts will definitely respond to other people's parts. And so when we're in the presence of another person's parts, we can have a reaction to that. And this is particularly true for people who have been in extremely abusive or traumatic situations. And sadly, some overfunctioning and burdened parts can actually take on language and behavioral patterns, thoughts that are the same as the perpetrator of the abuse. And we'll touch on that in a minute, maybe with an example. Let me introduce you to the types of parts that you'll read if you check out some of the books on the reference list. There are really three types of parts to consider. One would be parts that we call exiles. These are parts that have been wounded or rejected or exploited or condemned for some reason. They have been banished from the system, so to speak, by the next two parts I'm going to talk about, and they've been banished for their own good or for the good of the system. They've been banished by either a group of parts called, these are managers. These are managers, as the name implies, that are there to manage or control the exiles. These would be the parts of us that are managing our image. So, Pike, did it bother you when she said no? And we say, or I might say, no, that didn't bother me at all, which is simply not the truth. But it's a part of me that's trying to not let on that I've been wounded by that and that everything's fine, okay? And so a part like that is interested in trying to make sure that people don't know all there is to know of us, because after all, they may not like us. We've all had that thought at some time or another, that if people really knew us, they may not really want to be with us. The second the third type of part here are called firefighters. And here again, as the name implies, firefighters respond quickly to put the fire out. What fire? This would be the fire of the exile's emotions. So when a wounded part is triggered and they're feeling shame or they're feeling guilt or loneliness, and it becomes so powerful and pervasive that the person's, perhaps their life is even in danger, or that they're just at risk of making a very, very bad decision, these parts will come forward to put out the fire. Now, how do they do that? They do that by really ushering the person into numbing behaviors. These would be binging, drinking, substance abuse, acting out, anything to numb and distract the pain. Those are firefighters. Parts become burdened along the way, and as a result of perhaps situations they've been in, or as I say, activating triggers that can pop up at any time in different places, they become burdened, and oftentimes it will create extreme problematic behavior. And so this is what we're trying to deal with as we think about balancing our own internal systems. And we're trying to notice, what overfunctioning parts do I have, or might you have, as we sort of go through the current circumstances and beyond. These overfunctioning protector parts, and I'm going to introduce the term here, protector parts. These parts are overfunctioning for a reason, as I think I've touched on this before, but this idea that they're trying to protect the system, or they're trying to protect the person from problems, and they're doing the best they can to do that, albeit they are not equipped fully to do that. None of these parts are intended to be general managers. They're not like a CEO. They do not have the breadth and capability and judgment to run the overall system. As I said earlier, that's really the purview of the self. And so when they try to lead the system, they end up being woefully inadequate to do that. And so sometimes when they're over-functioning, they will actually blend with the self in such a way that it's hard to know, where did the real person go? Or it seems like that's really who he or she is that. And that's not true. Now, let me share an example here that may be relevant for some of you, building on the idea that I mentioned before. Let's imagine that a young person finds out that, or is exposed to the idea that someone found them too heavy, and they called them out on that, and they made fun of them or ridiculed them for that. It's a very hurtful thing. And let's say that there's a part there with that person who never forgets that. And so now we would say that's a burdened part. And let's say as that part considers that, it continues to become more and more focused on that. And it starts to think, I'm going to make sure that never happens again. So I know what I'll do. I'm going to just work out and work out and work out. Well, they do that. And after a while, they start to maybe set some audacious goals that they're not able to achieve for weight loss or otherwise. And when they fail, they experience shame. And when they experience that shame again, it's as if the exile has been flooded all over again. And so now perhaps a manager part comes out and says, what is happening here? And he or she, that part, restores order just by sort of taking control and banishing the exile again, pushing the firefighter aside, and pushing the person back into the behavior that led them into this again to start with, which is setting unrealistic goals. And so the cycle continues. Sort of the exile being triggered, an emotion coming out, a firefighter putting it out, and then unfortunately the person acts out, they feel shame, the manager pops out and sets some unrealistic, unachievable goal, and the cycle again perpetuates itself. And that's how that can show up over and over again in our lives. Doesn't with everyone and in every situation, but for people who have been in extremely problematic areas with trauma and abuse and assaults and things of that nature, or they've been in a system which has been extremely critical and hurtful. So let's talk a little bit about the goal of parts work then. The goal here is to become self-led in order to balance the internal psychological system, as you can see on this slide. And so how we're going to do that is we're going to identify our parts. We're going to look for any over-functioning parts we may have. We're going to notice the protector parts. And we're also going to notice that they may resist change. I'll just mention the idea of homeostasis here. This is the idea that none of us like to change. And sometimes even old habits are better than changed habits because it's change, it's new. I don't know how that's going to turn out. I would rather just stay in a familiar, unpleasant situation than start a new situation just because I'm scared. And so, but some of these protector parts may leave us stuck in the past, and it may be also because they're skeptical of the self's ability to lead. So how are we going to do this? We're going to go through I'll just describe it as a structured internal dialogue. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But it's where we're just going to do some self-talk. We do this all the time. We just don't tell people we do it, or we don't take the time to really reflect on it. So we're just going to sort of bring what's sort of covert, make it overt a little bit here. And the goal here is also then to notice that if we have some really strong over-functioning parts, we may also have some parts who are less well developed that are really valuable, and that we would like to give them a chance to kind of grow and be developed just a little bit more. Here's what we would want to do. If you take a look at this slide, there's basically three things that we would, and this is where you can think about trying this on your own. We all seem to have more free time now than we need. So this is really a healthy exercise, and we rarely have the chance to do this because in our fast-paced world, we simply don't have the time or don't take the time. Because this is not always comfortable, but it's so rewarding and rich if we can create some quality time for this. But the first step would be just to get to know your parts, starting with your managers and firefighters. What are the active parts for you? And as you can see here, where and when do you notice strong feelings? What thoughts or reactions are present frequently for you? What parts help you navigate your life? In other words, what do you notice, let's say at work or at home? What parts have others noticed? So those will be ways to sort of identify some of your parts. Also, when you identify your parts, notice the relationship between your parts. You may notice that, I have some parts, they seem to kind of hang out together. In other words, where one is, the other one always seems to be there. Or you may notice that I've got some parts that don't seem to like each other very much. If anyone has perhaps lived in a dysfunctional home situation, we'll just take alcoholism, for example. Alcoholism was present in my home, and within my home, we had both coalitions as well as polarized relationships. So our family learned to sort of hide what was happening. So to the outsiders, no, we were all fine. The fact that there was a police car there the night before, really not a problem. So we had a coalition around that. But inside, there were polarized parts. Some of us wanted to confront certain behavior, some of us didn't. And so perhaps some of you have recognized that and had your own experiences with some of that. But just notice your own parts and jot that down and identify those. Now, once we have identified these parts, here's how we're going to work with them. If you take a part that may be overfunctioning, you might ask these things. How do you feel towards that part of you? How do you feel towards it? That's a helpful question to differentiate you and yourself from this overfunctioning part. If your response to that is sort of a condemning or an unpleasant emotional response, just notice that part as well and ask that part to maybe step back. When you eventually kind of find a place where you feel curious or compassionate towards an overfunctioning part, that would suggest that you're in yourself. In other words, you're no longer threatened by this part. You're just curious about it. Like, where did this part come from? Why is it working so hard? Those would be very legitimate questions. And so those are the right questions to ask. What is this part's job? What does this part think its job is? Would it be willing to step back a little and not work so hard? Is a great question. If you notice resistance, you could ask it, what can you do to help unburden the part so that it would feel comfortable stepping back? Again, if you notice resistance, you could ask this, what is it afraid would happen if it did step back? In other words, you can explore, why is that part so worried about or trying to maintain homeostasis, to use that word? So that'll provide you a little bit of a roadmap. The last thing I want to say here is with respect to exiles. Exiles, in order for them to heal, they need to know that the self will be safe and secure, and they need to have an interaction with that person, which they were not able to have at the time they were traumatized. So essentially what we imagine in our mind is a reunion between the exile and a healthy self, and where the exile could experience a healthy, safe, mature, strong adult that they wish they would have had at the time the burden or the wound occurred, if that makes sense to you. And this is not work to necessarily be done alone. If you have had extreme trauma or you've been in very difficult situations, because protector parts stuck in the past, they will probably resist with very strong reactions. And I would definitely recommend that those of you who may know that you've been in very traumatic situations, that you seek professional counseling to maybe help with that. And certainly at the Refuge Center for Counseling, we would be honored to speak with you if we can help. This last slide, some things for you to consider would be to, as you think about becoming and staying self-led, so if you find your way into being operating from yourself, integrate your faith, whatever that means to you, to strengthen self. Our spirituality is a very important part of who we are, so think about integrating that. Think about managing your transitions well. This is oftentimes where parts, they don't make the shift. We've been at work all day, we have certain parts out, we go home, suddenly we're a mother, suddenly we're a dad, but we're still functioning as an employee or a business owner, and that can be problematic when children need parents, and yet what they're getting is a CEO or something. So we want to just make the transition. So think of a 3-minute pause to help you with that, perhaps in your car or in your office. You can also think of deep breathing and hydration to help you stay regulated. Deep breathing will help calm your adrenaline down. Hydration will also dilute the hormones that are triggering some of the adrenaline. And lastly, as I mentioned, seek counseling as needed. There is a mindfulness exercise on the resource list that we're going to provide you, and you can print that out if it's helpful to you and take a read, and it's an exercise that you can do with your own parts, and so maybe you can check that out and use that. So thank you for this time. I will just again want to say there are some excellent books. Some of those are for people who are not therapists. There are some books there for people who are therapists. Feel free to check any of those out. I would also say this particular model works extremely well with couples as as well as individuals. So you might want to think along those lines as well. So I'll say, again, I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Best to you and your family, those you love, as we navigate this difficult time right here. And I'm sure we'll come out the other end of it. And I just want to say blessings to all of you, and thanks again.
What wonderful resources you have just received from our 3 phenomenal speakers. We hope that this content will be especially meaningful to you as we navigate this present uncertain time. We hope that each of the speakers brought you some tidbit that helps you face this with presence, connection, and intention. At the Refuge Center, we always say that no matter who you are, where you live, what you've done or what's been done to you, you don't have to walk this road alone. In closing, I'd invite each of you to consider taking either a first step with us or a deeper step with our organization. As I'm sure you're aware, the emotional wellness and mental health needs of individuals will only increase as a result of everything that we have been through. For some of you, a first step might mean signing up today to receive our newsletter and be on our mailing list. It might be something as simple as following us on social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. For some of you who live within the state of Tennessee, you might consider calling us or referring a friend or family member to us. Our website is therefugecenter.org and our phone number is 615-591-5262. And even through this time, we have individuals who are available to answer your call Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we're offering telehealth services Monday through Saturday of each week. So you may decide that now is the time to reach out and get some support. We would encourage you to make that call. As you know, counseling is essential, life-saving work. One other way that you can support the Refuge Center for Counseling is by investing in this ministry. More than ever, we are counting on the generosity of people who are able to make a gift. One of the things we'd like to offer today is the opportunity for you to become a faith builder. So if you go to our website and sign up to be a monthly giver, which we call Faith Builders, that gift is just a minimum of $40 a month. So on average, our clients pay $45 per session, but on average it costs us $85. So that $40 gap is where we need support from donors. And when you sign up to be a monthly faith builder, you're doing just that. Each $40 gift provides one life-saving counseling session. Thank you again, friends, for joining us today and being present with us virtually. Our website and phone number will be listed on the screen so that you can stay connected and engaged with the Refuge Center for Counseling. Also listed will be the resources that have been provided by our fantastic speakers today. As we've all learned through this crisis, suffering does not discriminate, and we need each other. So stay connected to Refuge, stay engaged with what's going on here, and thank you again for spending your time with us.